Welcome to the show, Faith.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sometimes I do an introduction before I have the guest come on, but I couldn't really decide how to introduce you on my own, so I thought I'll get your help introducing you. Faith Ortins here today. You are the founder of Blue Green Expeditions. We had Ashley Buggy on the show last week. She talked about a recent expedition that she did with your team. And I'm just fascinated by all the things that happen, in different corners of the world created by people like you. So thank you for being here. And
Thank you.
we're going to discuss the topic of your company and how you founded it and why it's important and how you involve students in education. So there's a lot to uncover here. Let's get started. So
Okay.
you have a love of the ocean. I can tell by your background.
Mhm.
Your background in life and the picture behind you. And so tell me your start. Tell me what made this something that you wanted to bring to the rest of the world. I mean, even starting as how young were you when you started to have a love for the ocean?
Well, I grew up in Massachusetts, so I was very close to the ocean. Went there all the time as a kid. And even though my family, nobody in my family ever swam, never mind scuba dive, I very early on in life decided that I wanted to explore underneath the water. Part of it is maybe my curiosity, and part of it is exposure to people like Sylvia Earle and Eugenie Clark and Jacques Cousteau as a kid. I mean, there was a big thing when I was young. So I got certified when I was 15 years old. I was when it was the first legal time I could get done. It was the earliest they were done back then. And that was, I'll date myself and say that was 1979. So I got certified. And then my parents, who are terrified of the ocean, proceeded to tell me that, okay, you're certified. We let you get certified. We signed all that paperwork, but we're not going to let you go scuba diving without people we don't know, with people we don't know. So I'm like, well,
That's fair at first, right?
well, I can appreciate that, but it didn't help very much because they didn't know anybody who swam. Never mind.
Let alone dived. Yeah.
So it was a little bit of a problem. And so I, being, my resourceful self, decided to find a way around this. And what I would do is ride my bike every weekend to the local dive shop with all my the scuba equipment I had, which was, I actually had most items then, except for a regulator and weights, and which would have been hard to ride on a bike anyway, and a tank. So I rode by my bike to the local dive shop, sat next to the air fill station where people came in to get their tanks filled, and begged people to take me diving. Anybody. Okay. It was probably not the smartest thing I've ever done. Okay.
This was without your parents knowing.
This is without my parents knowing. And they found out, years later after this, this story appeared in a magazine somewhere. And the end result is probably about a third of the time I had somebody say, okay, sure, we can have somebody tag along, no problem. Part of it is because I couldn't.
It would never happen these days. Or
Oh yeah, no way, that could never happen these days.
no one would take the liability and
Liability and safety, and there's a whole pile of reasons that was even then maybe not the smartest thing to do. But nobody really thought much of it back then. I mean, it was a long time ago. And so people would take me diving, and because I couldn't bring lobsters home to my parents, I would give them my lobsters. So that was always maybe a popular person. And it turned out that years later, a number of years later when I was in college, I actually found out that two of the people who used to take me diving were actually icons in the diving industry, and they were just paying it forward. They were, and I became, that
I
inspired.
was hoping you were going to say that they were like criminals or something.
Oh, no. There was good things.
Good people. Yeah.
And they were, and I think that mentorship from them really, kept me going from the very beginning, because one of the challenges when people get certified is having somebody to go diving with, and that kept me going, going in college. I became a high school teacher, and I started a dive program at my high school, which also would probably maybe not be done nowadays either. And I partnered with a gentleman who was manager at a local dive center, and he became one of my best friends ever. and actually is now my partner in Blue Green Expeditions. So,
Oh, very
one of those, small world kind of things. You
yeah.
never know how things are going to go. And one thing led to another. And after some frustrations with, shall we say, the administration in the school system, who are a little bit rigid for me at that time, I decided to buy the local dive center. And one thing, that went really
How
well.
you were a teacher at this point?
I was a high school teacher. I decided to give that up, even though I was a high school science teacher, and I loved it. I loved the kids, absolutely loved the kids. I just really had challenges with my boss, to be honest. I don't think he's alive anymore, so it's fine.
So
But the bottom line is that I still wanted to keep educating, and because actually that's really always been my mindset. No matter, even though I've been in what people would call maybe sales jobs for a while, I never considered myself a very good salesperson. I just considered myself an educator who was bringing opportunities to people, because I think the opportunity to learn to scuba dive and become more engaged with the ocean is one of the most amazing things you can do to broaden people's perspective and to improve their lives. And that's how I looked at owning a dive store, was how I could do that. And especially at the time, because women in diving were not very common. It was just starting to become an okay thing, to have women's dive gear. It was a very, women's size dive gear. I remember what my wetsuit would fit like back when I got certified. And things were getting better, but it was still, there was a lot of what I would say, old guard kind of in charge, who maybe didn't like that idea. So, I had to deal with some of that.
yeah,
I wanted to be a cold water diver because I lived in Massachusetts, right? And if
right.
I dive in there, I wasn't going to dive all that often. This is kind of pre-dive travel, where at least dive travel was very common. And the end result is I actually went along and invented, with the help of Diving Unlimited International and the owner of that company, who was a gentleman from the early days of diving, but who had 4 daughters, so he could appreciate
Yeah.
the women involved in the sport. And he
They
partnered.
call those girl dads these
Yeah,
days.
one of those girl dads. Exactly. He's a great guy. And the two of us partnered to develop the first women's dry suits.
Mm.
And
Wow.
that opened up what you see behind me.
Yeah.
Okay, is those possibilities, whether it be exploration to remote cold water places, which a lot of the remote places are, as well as deeper diving, where it's colder, things like that. So
Have you dived in the San Juans? It's a cold water.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. Absolutely.
I have to put you in contact with someone who's made videos back in those days. I think it was mostly in the 80s. They'd made dive videos throughout the San Juan Islands, probably dove there 1,000 times. And they made videos to kind of give people an idea where to go. You have to be quite an experienced diver to dive in the San Juans because the current and such. But yeah, just really fascinating that, you can obviously either coast, there's options, but different waters for different things. And the person who I'm speaking of, he said that that the San Juan Islands, he's dived many places throughout the world, and the San Juan Islands is one of the most beautiful places. And people don't expect that because of the current and that kind of thing. But let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about Blue Green Expeditions and how you make the leap from the dive shop to traveling to to all of the coldest places. Talk about the coldest places in the world. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we are back. So much to cover, Faith. You are the co-founder of Blue Green Expeditions, and you were talking with us about your dive experience and being really the reason that women can dive in cold waters because there weren't dry suits for women back in the day. And so really forging ahead for people. And so we talk about Blue Green Expeditions. You bought the dive shop to try and, break through some of those barriers that you were experiencing. how do you go from the dive shop to founding Blue Green Expeditions? I'm sure there's some really cool things in between.
Well, the big thing is that my relationship with the company Diving Unlimited International that helped I worked with for developing the women's dry suits, became a really strong connection, and I ended up becoming their vice president of sales and marketing a number of years later. I moved to San Diego, lived there for 19 years, and really enjoyed it. I had a wonderful time working at DUI, and worked very hard during that time to really do two things. One was to, again, improve access of people to all kinds of diving. We really, really wanted to get people involved in not just warm water diving, but also cold water diving and exploration. And the other part was to make them safer doing that. Okay, so part of that is keeping them warm, but also part of it is sometimes we worked with a lot of public safety communities to increase their safety by wearing contaminated water equipment and things like that. So it was a really rewarding, experience doing that. And but at a certain point in time, we had started with DUI doing some what we call DUI owners trips. So dogs, and so getting the DUI owners together and doing cold water diving trips. And they went really well, and there was a lot of interest in them, and I was organizing them. And one thing led to another. And the next thing I'm doing more of those trips than just about anything else, And at a certain point, the company and I had a discussion about, well, Faith, are you going to be in the office or are you going to be doing this stuff? And
You're like, this stuff.
I can appreciate that. From their perspective, certainly being in the office was what they needed. But at that point, being out and working with people in the field and sharing my passion for the ocean with people was a little bit more important to me. And so that's why we decided to form our own company and go ahead and develop Blue Green Expeditions as a company that would be engaging people in the ocean, especially in ways that maybe they're not used to, whether it be cold water or remote places, getting people excited about exploration and educating people. Okay,
that's the thing is these days we learn about explorers. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
We learn about explorers in school when we're young, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of forget that there's still so many places to explore, and particularly the ocean, obviously. And obviously you're going to places you've been before and you're going back to some of the same places, but discovering new things. And from what Ashley was explaining to us about citizen science and really trying to make sure that for the scientists who can't be in the water, like maybe they're in their office or in their laboratory or the things that you're describing, you have an opportunity to bring some of that content and that information back and bring people along with you. People like Ashley, who I mentioned was on the show last week talking about the expedition she went on with you. So one of the things I want to ask is, how do you decide who goes with you? How are they chosen? Do they apply? How much experience does one have to have? Because I know that there are people who are divers and interested in science, and that's a pretty beautiful marriage that you've created for both.
Well, we really try to emphasize trips that will be, in some way, produce information or in some way contribute to the knowledge base that we have in that area. And the polar expeditions are particularly good examples of that. And that one's a little bit more involved in that. Yes, we have an application for every person. They have to be pre-screened. Usually when somebody signs up, if I don't know who they are, I'm going to call and I'm going to say, okay, why do you want to be here? What are your expectations? What are your capabilities? And particularly for diving, we have very strict protocols for who can dive there. So, a number of dives and experience overall and things like that. So we go through that process with everybody.
What is that number of dives? Is there a magic number?
It's 30 dry suit dives and a minimum of 150 dives overall.
And does depth matter?
Nope, depth doesn't matter because we don't really go deep in the polar regions. For one is there isn't really much reason to, but also because we are very far away from help.
Right.
we try to do everything we can to keep it as safe as possible, because we are a long way from help.
Hmm. Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
So once you go through the process then and selected, so I'm guessing there's some people who probably reapply
yes.
when they're turned down at first and
Mhm.
are dedicated to achieving that goal of being selected.
Yep.
What is it like once you're out there? How would you describe it to somebody? I mean, if anyone's ever had something where they have to plan and really, organize and have every duck in a row, um, this would be one
Mhm.
really big
Yep.
example.
I
So how
agree.
do you even prepare for that as the person who is really responsible for the lives of all of these people you've gathered?
Well, we do a combination of both Zoom presentations. We have actually three different presentations that for the expeditions where we do a overall preparation, like how do you get ready? Actually, four presentations. How do you get ready for being on the ship and what to expect on the ship? Another presentation on photography, because a lot of people, of course, want to take pictures, and a presentation on the science, what science is being done and where maybe you might want to be at, what might want to fit in, and last but not least, the diving safety protocols. So four different required presentations, a very involved and detailed expedition manual that I've written and use for each expedition, and then we then also facilitate people who are trying to improve their diving skills. We set up opportunities to do training dives in cold water locations. So we've had a whole bunch of people come to Oregon last year, which is where I live now, because we have a lake that's called Clear Lake that has good visibility, which is pretty typical for most of the places we go to in the poles, and but also is basically 34 to 36 degrees year round, so pretty close to what they're going to get in the polar regions. But it's in a lake, so it's very benign, and we can it basically it's like going in a big cold water pool, and so it's a great place for practice and training. And we had about a dozen people come out last year and do a whole bunch of dives with us with that, and it worked out really well.
I can imagine that like if you training in one area that is something you're familiar with, and then you go off to these colder waters, that's very different than diving in temperatures that are, if you don't have your suit, you'd be okay in there.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
For sure. And the big thing is we tell everybody that, hey, listen, you can prepare all you want, you can have all the experience you want, but if you get there and we don't think you're ready, we're going to tell you. Okay. And unfortunately that decision is final. That's not a open
And does that mean they
discussion.
stay on the ship, but they just don't dive? Or does that mean
Correct. It means that they're taken from the diving, they turn into a snorkeler, and or a non-diver, if they want to do the land activities or whatever. And for the reality is most people understand that.
yeah, and they don't want to push that. Yeah.
They don't want to push that in. They know it's not where you want to mess up and
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
problem. And they also know that, we're responsible for everybody, right? And that they don't want to put their dive buddy at any risk, or, limit how much fun they're having, because they're worrying about that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And one more quick question. We'll take a break and wrap up. But I wanted to know too, when they come, so you had talked about, when we were off air, talked about scholarships and different things for students. So do people pay their way to go as well? Or sometimes it's covered by scholarships, or how does that work?
It depends. Most of the time it is a paying proposition. We do use the proceeds from our trips to benefit a lot of different programs, and maybe we can talk about that after the break.
Mhm.
But we also do sponsor certain people. So several of the organizations that we work with have interns and scholars that are benefiting from their program, and we will quite often bring them on our trips. So our most recent trip to the Arctic, for example, we had one of those interns from the Boston Sea Rovers with us for the 2 weeks, and she worked with the scientists doing the plankton research as well as went diving, and she had a wonderful time, and she did a great job, by the way.
Let's take a quick break. We're going to wrap up. There's so much to cover. I could have you on for a whole another episode, but let's take a break. We'll come back and finish up with you, Faith. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
We're finishing up with you, Faith, the founder of Blue Green Expeditions. One of the things I wanted to ask, you had mentioned some of the proceeds. This is a for-profit business. People pay some of the time to go on these expeditions, but when you come back, some of that money goes back into the causes that you support.
Yeah, we feel really passionate about paying it forward to the next generation. So we've donated, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years to trip proceeds to a variety of charities, all of which give scholarships and internships to young people to further marine careers or to get excited about diving in general, and so we're really excited to support them.
Yeah. You mentioned too that you have a lot of, thinking about giving back, like you were just saying, and how you're able to have impact. I commend you for that, how you're able to have impact for other organizations besides your own by giving that money. You mentioned also that sometimes you're someone who's working on the ground, or you might not be a diver, you might be a snorkeler. There's all these different roles. I'd imagine everyone comes back changed no matter their role. I mean, it's pretty
one of the things,
amazing.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the things that's most incredible about these expeditions is that nobody comes home the way they left. And our goal is to turn everybody who comes with us into a polar evangelist who will be an advocate for those regions when they get home. And it's particularly important now. We are at a very important crossroads in what happens there, and it is up to us. And if we don't change and we don't make it a big priority, then it's gonna turn around to hurt us in the end. But we will most certainly lose these incredible places, and they need a lot of advocates because coral reefs get a lot of excitement and a lot of attention, but it's hard to get advocates for ice sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's my passion.
That's hidden under there. Well, the other thing too I wanted to say is that I think you made a really. I'm all for people who are the administrators, who are in the office, who are taking care of those types of details. But it sounds to me like you made the right choice getting out of the office and going to do your expeditions and your explorations.
I hope.
Can you imagine your life any other way? I imagine you can.
Yeah, I can't imagine it actually.
Yeah.
And now people always are like, "Oh my God, don't you ever rest?" I said, "No, I got to plan the next trip."
Yeah, that's good. It's good. Something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Anyone who wants to reach out to you, I'm going to put your information there by your name. It's been here throughout the show, and just keep up the good work. What a great life you live. I'm so glad that you're able to do that and give back to others. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
All right. Take care. Be safe out there.